The night of our college reunion, I slept with Ethan Miller. Ethan, my best guy friend, my almost brother. We'd been in the same school since middle school, practically inseparable. And now, to add another layer of complication, he was my boss. Sunlight, harsh and unwelcome, sliced through the heavy curtains. My eyes burned as I tried to open them, but I forced myself to reach out, blindly groping. My fingers brushed against cool, bare skin, and a jolt of adrenaline cleared the fog in my brain. A low groan came from beside me. I froze, barely daring to breathe. Then I sat up, heart hammering against my ribs. My pupils dilated, and I stared, my blood turning to ice. There, sprawled out beside me, was Ethan. Clothes were scattered everywhere, a chaotic landscape of discarded fabric. My bra was draped, in a particularly undignified fashion, over the bedside lamp. This has to be a dream. I pinched my arm, hard. The sharp sting made me gasp. Ow! Rubbing my throbbing head, I tried to piece together the events of the previous night. The bar, the reunion, the toasts to our youthful past. I'd let the nostalgia wash over me, downing drink after drink. Beyond that, a blank slate. So, what exactly had I done? I threw back the covers, needing to assess the damage. My gaze fell on Ethan's shoulder, marked with a constellation of deep red fingernail scratches. A vivid, undeniable reminder of just how intense the night had been. My dignity, my self-respect, everything was in tatters. I scrambled out of bed, grabbing my clothes and throwing them on with a desperate urgency. I needed to escape the scene, and fast. My hand gripped the doorknob, but I hesitated, casting a glance back at Ethan. The sunlight illuminated his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw and cheekbones, lending him an almost severe beauty. Damn it. If he weren't Ethan, I'd be practically high-fiving myself for sleeping with someone so gorgeous. But he was Ethan, my best friend. The feeling was akin to swallowing 1,000 flies. All at once. How was I ever going to face him again? We'd known each other for over a decade. Our families were intertwined. Our childhood homes were practically next door to each other. Every New Year, my parents dragged me to his house for the obligatory greetings. His mother often teased me, playfully asking when I'd finally become her daughter-in-law. Ethan was a classic Pisces, charming, a little elusive, and always with a string of women in his orbit. I'd never considered our relationship in that way. And now, he wasn't just my friend. He was my direct supervisor. At work, he was a perfectionist, demanding and meticulous. Even with our long history, he frequently criticized me, sometimes to the point of tears. After graduation, he'd had a series of girlfriends, always introducing me as his best friend. There was a certain casualness to it, a way of defining our relationship for others that simultaneously reassured and distanced. The drive home from the hotel was a blur of confused thoughts. I distinctly remembered Ethan driving to the reunion, abstaining from alcohol all night. Which meant everything that happened had been initiated by me. The thought made me want to slap myself. Hard. Olivia, Olivia. What face will you have to face Ethan? My phone rang, the caller ID flashing, Ethan Miller. My heart leaped into my throat. What would I say? Would he bring up last night? What excuse could I possibly offer? A million anxieties churned in my stomach. I was an idiot, a complete and utter fool. The phone rang and rang, but I didn't answer. Finally, I switched it off. I spent the entire weekend holed up in my room, doing nothing but breathing. Barely even that. Monday morning arrived, and the prospect of facing Ethan at the office paralyzed me. I couldn't even summon the courage to leave the house. Fine, I'd quit. But around 10 a.m., Ethan started bombarding me with calls. On the 11th call, I finally answered. Before I could utter a word, his voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the silence. 10 minutes. Downstairs. I pulled back the curtains. His BMW was already parked below. There was no escaping this. Steeling myself, I went downstairs. As I reached for the car door, I rehearsed what I would say. We were adults. We could forget this drunken mistake. But Ethan handed me a warm glass of milk, his expression cool and detached. I know you're about to start your period, but don't use your relationship with me as an excuse to be late or leave early. I stared at him, speechless. The words I'd prepared died on my lips. He said nothing about the previous night. It was as if it had never happened. Perhaps, to Ethan, it was insignificant. Seeing my silence, he spoke again as we waited at a red light. Dinner tomorrow night? I want to introduce you to my new girlfriend. I looked at him, surprised. Girlfriend? You broke up with the last one less than 5 days ago. I couldn't help adding, with a touch of sarcasm, I don't want to go. Who knows how long this one will last? Ethan shrugged, not denying it. He'd always changed girlfriends faster than he changed clothes. But a strange, unfamiliar feeling began to stir within me. I was distracted all day at work, making several errors on a supplier spreadsheet. Surprisingly, Ethan didn't scold me. In the past, he would have exploded. I remembered a time when a crucial client was flying to Shanghai for a meeting. The client was arriving at Hangzhou Airport at 7 p.m., but I mistakenly went to Pudong Airport. The client ended up waiting for almost 3 hours. Fortunately, Ethan managed to salvage the deal. In the subsequent meeting, he berated me in front of the entire department for half an hour. Even I began to feel utterly useless. He only stopped when I was on the verge of tears. Back at my desk, I opened a document and started drafting my resignation letter. But then, a message from Ethan popped up on WeChat. You've always wanted to try that Michelin-starred steakhouse. I made a reservation. 8 p.m. Just one line, and I was completely disarmed. He always knew how to get to me, how to soothe my temper. A friend of mine had often told me that there was no such thing as pure friendship between a man and a woman. But I'd never felt that kind of heart-fluttering attraction to Ethan. We were too familiar, too comfortable. He even remembered my menstrual cycle. I knew his phone number and ID number by heart. In my eyes, he was a stubborn, somewhat fickle man. But undeniably, he was talented, handsome, and always surrounded by beautiful women. That evening, I received a call from my mother. She said I was getting older and shouldn't be single forever. She mentioned that she'd recently spoken to a neighbor who had a son my age, recently returned from studying abroad, and that I should meet him. This was a thinly veiled attempt to set me up on a blind date. As a modern woman, how could I accept such an arrangement? I was about to protest, but my mother's tone hardened. Olivia, do you know how old you are? You're 31. You're not a 23-year-old fresh graduate anymore. Her words struck me dumb. She was right. I was 31, no longer a young girl. I'd had 2 relationships after graduation, but neither had worked out. Seeing my friends and classmates settle down, how could I not feel a little anxious? My mother had never been so forceful. Perhaps I really had worried her. This time, she'd arranged the time and place for the blind date, leaving me no room to refuse. Next Saturday, at People's Square, I would meet the boy who had just returned from studying abroad. Lately, my relationship with Ethan had become subtle. Or perhaps it was only me who felt that way. He seemed to be constantly around, often driving me to and from work, even though we didn't live far apart. But he still said nothing about that night, as if it had never happened. I hadn't told him about the blind date, but somehow, he'd found out. On Saturday, as I stepped out of my building, I saw his BMW parked there. Ethan leaned against the car, a cigarette held loosely between his fingers, unlit. The slightly rebellious pose made me look twice. As I approached, he spoke casually. I'm taking my girlfriend to a movie this afternoon. It's close to where you're having your blind date. I'll give you a ride. I wanted to refuse, but I couldn't think of an excuse. Before I knew it, I was bundled into the car. Ethan stepped on the gas, and the car shot forward. How's your date? He asked, seemingly offhand. I shook my head. My mom set it up. I don't know. Ethan turned his head, giving me a long, meaningful look. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, deep and unreadable. It was the first time he'd ever looked at me with such scrutiny. As it turned out, my blind date was my elementary school classmate, Mark Yu. He'd gone abroad after elementary school and only returned earlier this year. We were both surprised when we recognized each other. Mark was just as he'd been as a child, a bit clumsy, wearing black-rimmed glasses. But now, he'd grown into a towering 6'1" man, with an added touch of sunshine and charm. We were both inexplicably happy about this reunion. I'd even completely forgotten about Ethan, who had driven me there. It wasn't until I felt a chilling gaze fixed on me that I snapped back to reality. Ethan had gotten out of the car and was standing with his arms crossed, watching me, waiting for an explanation. His eyes held that familiar coldness, the look he gave me whenever I made a mistake at work. I swallowed. "Thank you for driving me here," I said. Then, I pulled Mark away. I hadn't expected that the clumsy boy from my childhood was now a PhD student in electronic engineering. While studying abroad, he'd even obtained 2 invention patents. And he'd applied for them under the name of his Chinese university. As soon as he finished his studies, he'd rushed back to China. Impressive. Truly impressive. And like me, he was single at this age, hounded by his family to settle down, and had reluctantly agreed to this blind date. We had so much to talk about. After dinner, Mark walked me home, and we continued to chat. "I remember we were desk mates for a year," Mark said, pushing up his glasses. "Yeah, you always fell asleep during math class and made me keep watch," I recalled. I couldn't help but laugh. Mr. Sun's classes were so boring. I'd get sleepy after a few sentences. Mark nodded. "That's true." We reached my building. I thanked him and was about to go upstairs when Mark called out to me. He hesitated for a moment, then asked if I was free next Saturday. He mentioned a play and asked if I wanted to go with him. I glanced at the time and agreed. But when I got home, my heart was pounding. While looking at my calendar, I'd realized something. My period was 15 days late. I'd always been regular, never experiencing any delays. This time, it was a full 15 days late. I'm usually pretty carefree, but I couldn't help but think about it. My heart was in my throat. After showering, I went downstairs to the pharmacy and bought a pregnancy test. On the way back, I searched online for information. I even started thinking about what I would do if I were pregnant. I was so engrossed in my phone that I didn't even notice the flashy, light blue BMW parked in front of my building. Not until someone tapped me on the head. "Ah." I froze, looking up to see Ethan. Perhaps because of his job, he was used to wearing suits. Most of his suits were custom-made, adding a touch of roguish charm to his already handsome appearance. If I didn't know he changed women faster than he changed clothes, I might have been fooled by his seemingly refined demeanor. "What are you so focused on? You're not even watching where you're going," his deep voice sounded beside my ear. I instinctively clutched the bag in my hand, hiding it behind my back. I shook my head. "Nothing, just some online gossip." I wasn't sure if my voice sounded strange, but I was definitely flustered. Ethan looked me up and down. Under the streetlights, a fleeting emotion crossed his deep-set eyes. It was too quick for me to catch. I changed the subject. "What are you doing here?" He glanced at me. "How's it going with your date?" He probably hadn't come all this way just to check on me. Seeing my silence, Ethan raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "All right, I broke up. I wanted to have a drink with you." By my calculations, his latest relationship had lasted a little over a week. Not too short. I wasn't surprised in the slightest. To say Ethan was fickle wasn't entirely accurate. He was just extreme. He was an extreme perfectionist. With every girlfriend, if he sensed even the slightest possibility of future unhappiness, he'd cut it off. So, despite having so many relationships, he hadn't really been criticized for it. He always said that life was too long to settle for anything less than perfect, that he wanted to find someone he could always get along with, someone he wouldn't get tired of, no matter how long they were together. If there was even a hint of incompatibility that could lead to arguments, conflict, or distance, he didn't want it. I'd even believed his theory for a while, but later, I realized it was just a fancy excuse for his fickleness. People are individuals with their own thoughts. Even the most compatible couples will have friction. My mind was consumed with the thought of my late period. I had no desire to drink with him. I walked past him. This lady has no free time. Find somewhere to drown your sorrows. It may have been the first time that I just left him standing there. Any other time he had called, I went. Thankfully, the pregnancy test showed only one line. I wasn't pregnant. That was a relief. I'd even considered what I would do if I were pregnant. Would I secretly get an abortion? Quit my job and leave? Or make Ethan take responsibility? None of those options appealed to me. On Saturday, I met Mark to see the play. He arrived a little early and went to a nearby mall to buy milk tea. While I was waiting for him at the theater entrance, I unexpectedly ran into Susan Miller. She was Ethan's ex-girlfriend. They'd been together for about 3 months, one of his longer relationships. When they broke up, Susan had come to me, asking me to persuade Ethan to reconsider. It was clear she'd been genuinely in love with him. But Ethan's personality was such that once he made up his mind, no one could change it. I could only tell her the truth. I'd thought that when I saw Susan, we'd exchange polite greetings. After all, we'd had dinner together a few times. But surprisingly, her eyes were filled with malice. I'm a sensible person, and I wouldn't force myself on someone who clearly disliked me. Susan's obvious disgust meant I wouldn't bother her. As I turned to leave, Susan called out to me. "Olivia, long time no see." She walked over to me, her heels clicking on the pavement. She was already taller than me, and with her high heels, I had to tilt my head back to look at her. In those few seconds, my mind raced, trying to recall if I'd ever offended her. But I couldn't think of anything. I forced a smile. "Long time no see." Susan looked at me sideways, clearly ready for a fight. She dropped a bombshell. "Olivia, have you ever heard the term single nuisance?" I was taken aback, momentarily speechless. But from Susan's expression, it was clear she deeply disliked me. She crossed her arms, her tone filled with disgust. "If you really like Ethan, just be with him. Why hide behind the guise of best friend and bask in his special treatment?" I frowned, carefully considering her words. I even asked her, "Are you misunderstanding something?" Her response was a derisive laugh. "Olivia, you don't know, do you? Many of Ethan's ex-girlfriends hate you. You're the only one who's oblivious." Where did this unfounded accusation come from? The play was about to start, and the theater entrance was crowded. Susan's arrogant accusations drew the attention of many onlookers. I'd become a third wheel, the object of scorn. "Susan, your relationship with Ethan is not something I can change. Don't blame me because I didn't persuade him. You know Ethan's personality. He and I have always been just friends." My explanation didn't earn her understanding, but rather, even more scorn. As she spoke, her emotions became increasingly agitated. Once, you sprained your ankle, and with one phone call, Ethan drove back from Suzhou overnight. He'd promised to take me away for the weekend. Another time, at a gathering, I'd booked a restaurant half a month in advance. But because you don't eat spicy food, Ethan insisted on changing the venue. Haven't these things happened a lot? Olivia, have you ever asked yourself if your relationship with Ethan is just that of ordinary friends? I remembered the incidents she mentioned. But in my mind, they were just acts of concern between friends. Coming from Susan, however, they sounded incredibly harsh. More and more people were gathering around, some even pointing and whispering. I wanted to explain, but the words caught in my throat. "Susan, you've misunderstood." I knew very well that we'd never crossed any lines, and I'd never had romantic feelings for him. But the things Susan mentioned were all true. When Mark pushed his way through the crowd and stood in front of me, I felt like I'd found a lifeline. He instinctively pulled me behind him, shielding me from Susan's anger. In that moment, I was grateful to him. But I was also confused. I couldn't help but think about every word Susan had said. A single nuisance? I'd never imagined I'd be labeled with something like that. I was distracted throughout the play, not really paying attention to what was happening on stage. On the way home, Mark walked me to my building, and I kept my head down. At the entrance to my building, Mark hesitated. I just got back to China, so I don't have a Chinese driver's license yet. I'm preparing for the road test. Once I get my license, I'll buy a car. As for housing, I'm considered a talent import, so I get some housing subsidies. I don't want to rely on my parents. I'm thinking of taking out a loan to buy a 2-bedroom apartment first, and then upgrading to a bigger one in a couple of years. He was incredibly serious as he said this. After he finished, he looked at me intently, his eyes flickering with a hint of nervousness under the streetlights. This 6'1" giant seemed awkward in front of me. Why are you telling me this? My instinctive question made Mark a little disappointed. I wasn't that clueless, but my mind was in turmoil and I couldn't focus on his feelings. Back home, I took a shower and was drying my hair with a towel when my phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. Was the play good today? And then, that damn smiley face. Calming down, I thought about the things Susan had said. That time, I'd just joined the company through Ethan's introduction and was assigned to a different project team, responsible for a negotiation. After accompanying the client to a suburban warehouse to inspect the goods, the team leader suggested grabbing a bite to eat. Before I came, Ethan had specifically warned me not to casually attend any dinners or drinking parties. I'd kept that in mind, so I declined. The team leader was displeased with my refusal, his face darkening, but he couldn't vent in front of the client. Later, he left me alone at the suburban warehouse, telling me to take a taxi back. The signal there was terrible, and I couldn't get online, only make calls. I walked for 2 kilometers in my high heels, my feet blistering, but I couldn't hail a taxi. To make matters worse, it started to rain. I rushed to find shelter, but my ankle twisted and I fell into a puddle. I hadn't initially thought of calling Ethan. I knew he was in Suzhou with Susan, but he was my speed dial contact. When my phone flew out of my hand, it somehow dialed his number. Ethan answered almost immediately, before I could even hang up. I couldn't hide anything from him, and besides, I was in such a sorry state. I felt a flicker of hope that Ethan might be able to help me. I could hear the urgency in his voice. It had grown louder. He told me to find a place to shelter from the rain and stay put. I obeyed, because I couldn't think of anything else to do. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gotten myself into such a mess in the first place. Perhaps, deep down, I was reliant on Ethan. The realization hit me hard. I'd been so focused on thanking Ethan, on acknowledging the awkwardness we felt, that I'd completely overlooked the hurt I might have caused Susan. I sat on the sofa, clutching my phone, staring at Ethan's message. Single nuisance. Could that label really be applied to me? I started to consider Mark's words more seriously. I wasn't a child anymore. I understood perfectly well what he was implying. We were both adults, brought together by a blind date, and any further interactions should be based on that foundation. My mom had been calling incessantly, singing Mark's praises. He was a good catch, a potential stock, as they say. He was just starting his career back in China, but several top companies were already courting him. His future was bright. Mark didn't have much relationship experience. He'd spent most of his time studying abroad. According to my mother, this meant he wouldn't be the type to play games. Being with him was comfortable. He listened to my opinions, respected my choices. Except for the fact that I didn't love him, Mark was perfect. I didn't reply to Ethan's message. He called instead. His first words were, "Olivia, you've got some nerve. You just met him, and you're already out with another guy until so late." Ethan's tone was laced with a mix of dissatisfaction and accusation. As I listened to his scolding, I gradually zoned out. After a long while, during a brief pause in his tirade, I said, "Ethan, I'm going to try a relationship with Mark." A beat of silence followed. I checked my phone. The call hadn't been disconnected, but Ethan remained silent. For several minutes, we were locked in a silent standoff. I was waiting for his reaction. Finally, Ethan reverted to his usual flippant tone. "That's great." Yes, I was 30-something, not a kid. No one stays in the same place forever. It was time for me to move on to the next stage of my life. Ethan suggested we all go for a barbecue in a few days, with Mark and his girlfriend. As my best friend, he said he wanted to check him out. I couldn't refuse. Ethan seemed perfectly calm, but I felt a strange unease, a knot in my stomach. I didn't even know what I was hoping for. After hanging up, I messaged Mark, essentially saying I was willing to give it a try. Mark expressed immense joy, promising to do his best as a boyfriend and asking me to tell him immediately if he did anything wrong. On the third day of our official relationship, as Mark walked me home, he instinctively took my hand at a crosswalk. I didn't pull away. Even after we crossed the street, our hands remained clasped. He kept his head down the entire time, his palms slightly sweaty. When we reached my building, he still didn't look up at me. Something inside me softened, warmed. The feeling was fleeting, almost surreal. A ridiculous thought popped into my head. If it weren't for Ethan, I might actually fall for Mark. The thought vanished as quickly as it appeared. Before Mark left, I caught his sleeve. Ethan invited us to a barbecue tomorrow with his girlfriend. The name seemed unfamiliar to Mark. Seeing his blank expression, I added, I mentioned him before. He's my boss. Mark nodded. Okay, I'll pick you up tomorrow. Then he left. As I watched him go, I noticed the back of his ears were red. He was nervous. My period still hadn't come, but after the negative pregnancy test, I wasn't as worried. The next day, when I went downstairs, I saw not only Mark but also Ethan leaning against his BMW. He was dressed in a black suit, the top 2 buttons of his shirt undone, revealing his tanned skin. His devilishly handsome face was etched with a look of nonchalance. He raised an eyebrow when he saw me. Mark stood a short distance away, near a small flower bed, holding a small backpack. I glanced at Ethan and walked directly toward Mark. I could distinctly feel a chill emanating from behind me. What did you bring? Mark pushed up his glasses, smiling. You said we were going for a barbecue, so I brought some snacks and drinks for you. Looking at this 6'1" man, my heart suddenly softened. Ethan's piercing voice shattered my thoughts. He grabbed my sleeve, pulling me toward the car, his tone impatient. Olivia, do you know what the temperature is today? It's so hot, and you want to stand outside and chat. I tried to pull away, but Ethan had trained in martial arts. When he used his strength, I was no match for him. I could only retort, who was it who organized an outdoor barbecue on a day like this? It was early autumn in Shanghai, and while the temperature wasn't extremely high, it was incredibly humid. To wear a suit on a day like this, Ethan was really showing off. He practically shoved me into the passenger seat. Mark had to sit in the back, but he didn't say anything. Where's your girlfriend? Given his rate of turnover, I wasn't sure if it was the same woman I'd met last week. Ethan glanced at me, starting the car and saying casually, she'll get there herself. Unsurprisingly, Ethan's girlfriend this week was not the Kiki from last week's dinner. This girl looked young, beautiful, and full of energy. When she saw me, she politely called me Sister Olivia. Ethan stood beside her, saying nothing. We'd rented a small villa near the beach. Ethan and Mark were responsible for starting the fire, while his girlfriend, Wendy, and I prepared the ingredients. But the fire wasn't cooperating. It seemed easy enough, but the sea breeze kept blowing it out. Neither of them was particularly skilled in this area. Wendy and I finished preparing the ingredients and went to check on them. The charcoal still had only a few tiny sparks, easily extinguished by the wind. I suggested, maybe we should ask the hotel staff for help. Ethan, squatting there, frowned. He replied coldly, no need. I knew his stubbornness, so I didn't try to persuade him further. I was about to walk away to take a stroll when I heard a commotion behind me. The grill they were using to light the fire had completely collapsed. The scattered charcoal fell onto the nearby alcohol, causing a sudden burst of high flames. Ethan was closest, and a large patch of his shirt sleeve was scorched black. Seeing this, my heart leaped into my throat. I instinctively started to run toward Ethan. But Wendy shouted, "Ethan, are you okay?" A voice inside me tugged, and I stopped, turning to look at Mark. His hand seemed to be burned. I suppressed my urge to check on Ethan and turned toward Mark. After all, Mark was my boyfriend, wasn't he? Fortunately, He was farther away, and only a small part of his hand had been singed by the sparks, just a bit red. Does it hurt? Mark shook his head. I was about to look for a band-aid when I heard Ethan's roar. Olivia, are you blind? Can't you see I'm injured? I frowned at him. Ethan's arm was badly swollen and red. When the grill collapsed, he'd instinctively tried to catch it. Luckily, the charcoal hadn't fully ignited, or the consequences would have been much worse. Seeing the injury on his arm, my heart clenched. But Wendy, standing beside Ethan, was filled with concern. I looked away and said, Wendy, take him to get it treated. I didn't see Ethan's expression after that, but I imagined he was furious. Even as a friend, I shouldn't have been so indifferent. But I'd clearly sensed the change in our relationship. If I didn't make any changes, then Susan's label would become true. The gathering ended in discord. After they went to the hospital, Wendy called me. She said Ethan's injury wasn't too serious. The doctor said he needed to change the dressing every 3 days, and it should be fine in about 2 weeks. After returning home, I tried to call Ethan several times, but I always stopped myself. My period was now a month and a half late. At my best friend Tara's insistence, I took half a day off and went to the hospital. I sat in the hospital corridor, holding the report, feeling suffocated. I didn't even hear the doctor call my name. The nurse searched for me in the hallway, calling my name repeatedly. How could this be? When I used the pregnancy test, it only showed one line. The doctor looked at me, then at the report in his hand, and replied matter-of-factly, "You tested too early. It's normal to get a false negative. The blood test confirms you're pregnant." I didn't hear anything the doctor said after that. My mind was a jumble. As I walked out of the hospital, the doctor's words echoed in my ears. Intrauterine pregnancy, 10 weeks. So much so that I didn't even notice Jenna running after me all the way. At the hospital entrance, she breathlessly caught up to me, blocking my path. Olivia, I called you for so long. Why didn't you answer me? I snapped back to reality and looked at her. She was my high school classmate. We'd been close, but Jenna got married early and moved to Hong Kong with her husband, so we'd lost touch. I hadn't expected to run into her here. I struggled to organize my chaotic thoughts, forcing a strained smile. Jenna, long time no see. Jenna caught her breath, then said teasingly, I thought I'd mistaken you for someone else, but our school beauty is so striking wherever she goes. I couldn't possibly be wrong. I smiled. School beauty? That was just a joke among classmates. Indeed, women who didn't have to work always looked younger. I asked, why are you back? Jenna said her husband's company had set up an office in Shanghai, and they'd be living here for the next few years. Then, she suddenly asked, how's Ethan doing? I was momentarily speechless. After the barbecue incident, we'd grown more distant. Besides work, we rarely interacted. Although we saw each other at the office, I deliberately avoided Ethan. When Jenna asked, I could only say, he should be fine, I guess. To my surprise, she widened her eyes and asked, you two aren't together? Jenna said that everyone in our high school class had assumed Ethan and I would end up together. After all, we'd been in the same schools from middle school to university, and now we were even in the same company. No one was more constant than the two of us. When I denied this relationship, Jenna was incredibly surprised, even thinking I was joking. We exchanged a few pleasantries, promising to have dinner together when we had time, and then I hurried away. After learning about the pregnancy, I couldn't accept it for a while. But since it had happened, I had to face it. The first thing I needed to do was break up with Mark. I had to admit, in the month we'd been together, he'd been a perfect boyfriend. I couldn't find a single fault with him. But if I continued to be with him, it wouldn't be fair to him. I met Mark at a cafe. He came straight from work. I ordered him an Americano. When Mark sat down, he pushed up his glasses, looking at me with a gentle gaze. Why did you suddenly want to meet here? While waiting for him, I'd thought of 100 excuses, but when I saw Mark, I couldn't say any of them. I hesitated for a moment, then forced the words out. Let's break up. Mark's hand, holding the cup, trembled. Some coffee spilled, but he maintained the same expression he'd had before. Is it because of Ethan? I hadn't expected him to ask that. I looked up at Mark. Through his glasses, I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. I shook my head. I just don't want to be unfair to you. Mark didn't press further, didn't accuse me, didn't get angry. He said he respected my decision. At that moment, I didn't know whether to be grateful for his magnanimity or to mourn the relationship that had barely begun. Ethan went on a business trip to Shenzhen on Monday. I bypassed him and submitted my resignation letter directly to the head office. I originally planned to go straight back to my hometown, but I was afraid my mother would worry, so after quitting, I stayed at my best friend Tara's place. I scheduled an abortion, but the embryo wasn't fully developed yet, so I had to wait a few more days. The doctor said that, normally, the procedure couldn't be done until next week. After Ethan returned to Shanghai, he called me. I assumed he was going to question me about quitting. I didn't answer. I put my phone on airplane mode. On the day of the procedure, Tara offered to accompany me, but I refused. I was afraid I'd change my mind. Alone, there would be no turning back. In 4 months, I would be 32. I'd had a few relationships, envisioned marriage, and even reached the age where I wanted a child. When I learned that a life was growing inside me, I was hesitant. But I knew I wasn't ready to welcome it. Accepting it prematurely would be irresponsible to the child. After careful consideration, I decided to terminate the pregnancy. As for Ethan, I would tell him after the procedure. I changed into a surgical gown and lay on the cold operating table. The doctor wore a mask, so I couldn't see his face. He held my medical records and asked my name. I stared at the surgical lamp and answered mechanically, Olivia, 31. The doctor glanced at me and asked, "Are you sure about this?" I closed my eyes silently. My mind was like a slideshow, with past memories suddenly magnified. In college, Ethan had said to me, "Olivia, you'll probably never get married." I was sitting on the railing of the basketball court, holding a bottle of soda, giving him a fierce glare. Bullshit. He chuckled, his handsome face taking on a cocky expression. Thump. The operating room door was kicked open. I was stunned. I was strapped down, unable to see the door, but from the familiar sound of footsteps, I knew it was Ethan. But at this moment, I was naked from the waist down, my legs spread apart on the table. Ethan gave me a ferocious look, then dragged me off the operating table. He pulled me away, the screams and accusations of the doctors still echoing in my mind. I had no idea how he got me out of the hospital and into the car. I only knew that Ethan looked like he wanted to kill someone, his expression terrifying. He slammed on the accelerator, as if venting his anger. I swallowed, not daring to speak. When the car stopped, Ethan turned off the engine and placed both hands on the steering wheel. "Olivia, you're usually so good at talking. Give me an explanation." He spoke each word through gritted teeth. Knowing him for so long, I could tell that Ethan's anger had reached its peak, but he was desperately trying to control it. Explanation? What was I supposed to explain? That I'd accidentally slept with him that night? Or that I discovered I was unexpectedly pregnant 2 months later? I retorted, "How did you know I was here?" Ethan lost control, leaning in and gripping my chin. The veins on his forehead were bulging. "Olivia, I'm asking you." His roar startled me. Ethan frowned. "If I hadn't forced the truth out of Tara, were you planning to abort the baby and just disappear?" I looked into his eyes. I saw a flicker of fear in Ethan's eyes. It was an emotion he'd never displayed before. He was always calm, composed even in the face of catastrophe. Why was he suddenly so afraid? Ethan switched off ignition, retrieved a pile of documents from back seat, said, "Get out," in an imperative tone. It was the Civil Affairs Bureau. The documents in his hand contained our household registration books, identification cards. What was going on? Pointing at the papers and then to my surgical gown, I stated the obvious. A suit jacket couldn't conceal what lay underneath. Plus, this wasn't how marriage proposals went down. I never said I would marry him. But of course, Ethan was always domineering. He found a pair of shoes, tugged them on my feet, and buttoned my suit jacket before dragging me to the Civil Affairs Bureau. 30 minutes later, marriage certificate in hand, I gaped at the evidence. Was I hallucinating? Were these anesthesia after effects? I pinched my thigh. Agony confirmed reality. I flipped through the booklet in his BMW. "Ethan," I said, "is this thing legally binding?" Eye roll, devour me glare. One growled word, obviously. Had I just accidentally married myself off? I learned the full story later. After extracting information from Tara, Ethan sped to my hometown, confronted my parents, then took the household registration books. Marriage was set, but the certificate felt like a swindle. I went home, avoiding Ethan. That night, lying in bed, sleep tugged at my eyelids. Then, a noise from the balcony. Footsteps muffled on the floor. I sat up. Ethan climbed through my window. He paused, surprised, then reverted to that infuriating smirk. He removed his jacket, brushing off dust, and strolled in. Lucky your house is only 3 stories. Higher, I might have failed. Fists clenched, I yelled, "Ethan, have you no shame?" Anger simmered. The decision to quit, to terminate, it was upsetting, but my choice. Ethan's arrival, however, had steered my life in a direction I did not choose. I had married him in some sort of hazy confusion. I was still battling to get free from the friend category in this relationship, and everything felt wrong. Ethan acted like he had made the transition, being extremely affectionate. He came, sat, embraced me. Elbow jab, full force, to his chest. "Get away from me." Ethan winced, recoiling. I cranked the AC to its lowest setting, burrowing under the covers. Hometown nights were chilly in autumn. 16 degrees Celsius. He wouldn't last long, I figured. I expected retreat. But the shameless man climbed into bed, inching closer. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, pinning mine. I struggled, twisting. Ethan's low voice whispered in my ear. "Olivia, you were always so smart. How could you not see I've been plotting against you for so long?" I froze, stunned. He moved closer, holding me tighter. "At the college reunion, you were drunk, but I wasn't." The words hit me like a thunderbolt. So that night, Ethan had been complicit? Or rather, perhaps he had been the instigator. He asked I changed girlfriends so many times. "Didn't you ever get jealous?" I answered firmly, no. Heartless woman. After saying that, I pondered his words. When I joined Ethan's company, rumors started circulating about our unusual relationship. Office romances were frowned upon, especially within the same project team. Then, Ethan began changing girlfriends constantly, never hiding it. The rumors about us gradually faded away. At first, I disliked his behavior, feeling a strange discomfort. But eventually, I let it go. Ethan leaned down, nibbling on my shoulder. I gasped in pain. "Damn it, Olivia. I didn't want to eat where I sleep, but I couldn't find a single girlfriend who could drive you out of my heart." A warmth spread through me. I'd never directly confronted my feelings for Ethan. Or perhaps I hadn't dared to. We were too familiar with each other. When affection became habit, neither of us dared to break that barrier. Ethan held me close, whispering against my ear, "Olivia, I love you. Much more than you can imagine."